Well, hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining this Tech Talk session. We're going to be discussing back-end VFP to SQL migrations. I am Joe Rafanelli. I am the Director of Technical Solutions here at Macrosoft. At Macrosoft, we are a customized software development company that specializes in migrating old technology to new. We are a leading provider of professional technical services for VFP, Visual Basic, ASP, legacy migrations. Super excited to reintroduce Imran. He's a familiar face to these tech talks. He's Microsoft's VP of Migration Services, many years experience on this particular topic. I want to welcome Imran here today.
Thank you, Joe, and welcome everyone to our this tech talk. We already have discussed a lot, many topics about the Visual Fox Pro migrations. Today, we are again with you with an exciting topic about how we can keep the user interface with VFP and replace the database at the backend. Um, I have a lot of experience working myself in the Visual Fox Pro and migrating the application, so I think we'll have a very good discussion today.
Very nice. Very good. So typically what we do is we do a Q&A. I think you got a lot of knowledge between your ears on this one, which you typically do on all the topics. So instead of doing that, I'm going to kind of let you loose on this and let you talk about your experience and what you want to say as far on this topic. And then what I'll do, if there's a question or two I'll go ahead and ask that, and then we'll just go right to the chat questions. So why don't you go ahead and share the knowledge?
Okay, Visual Fox Pro was a great tool that provides database and the application development environment both. It was very popular because of its Rushmore technology. The database was so tightly binded with application as it requires always a good plan to migrate the VFP application. It's not simple migration; it requires a very good plan. We will discuss today. Our clients usually want to migrate both the database and the user interface to modern platforms, but we also have the clients who just want databases to be migrated only. I put together some slides to discuss on this topic in more detail. So let's move to the slides.
Thank you.
Uh, I hope my screen is visible to everyone.
Not just yet. We'll give it a minute here.
I think it came right now.
Okay.
I
Yeah, we
just
see it. It just
right.
came up now.
Right. So let me discuss this topic from very beginning, starting with the simple thing and take it to the more details of it. My screen right now is showing how a typical Visual Fox Pro application looks like. It's a very simple way. It's a code and the database both in the Visual Fox Pro environment in one box. I mean, you can of course deploy the database in a separate box, and the VFP code can read the database. But it's basically in one thing, in one Visual Fox Pro with the code and the database. Then there is a another arrangement of VFP application which has the code in the Visual Fox Pro. With code, I mean the forms, the classes, the PRG file, and the reports. Everything is code, and that code is talking to an external database, for example, SQL Server. In that way, all the database is in the SQL Server, and the VFP code is calling that. So what we are discussing today is how we migrate the database only from VFP database to any modern database like SQL. Rushmore technology was introduced by VFP. It was very good, made the applications very fast. It provides efficient access to the data. Query optimization was so super. That way it basically provide the robust application. It was so popular that the database was very tightly binded to the code, and because of that also the VFP code is written based on this Rushmore technology. We need to understand how the code is written, and when we are migrating from VFP database, that how this all logics and the technology will work. um, One can question also that, okay, why we are replacing the VFP database. This is often a topic there, and the main concerns are the data security. VFP is the file-based database, while there are new security requirements from the companies, so they want newer, modern database engines like SQL Server, which provides more security to the data. End of support is the another major thing, because 2009 Microsoft ended the support and there is no more supported, and keeping the database in the still the VFP, there will be a big risk there. Scalability and performance, these two things come with the new modern databases, with the more modern technology. So this is another benefit that right now VFP is losing. And of course, the business continuity is completely dependent on the new technologies and the longer support. So let's see the full migration versus the database migration only. So typical VFP application, we have two choices to go. Go for the complete migration, migrate the code to a newer technology like C Sharp .NET and the SQL Server as the database, or we can go with the path by keep the code in the Visual Fox Pro, but migrate the database to any new modern database server like SQL Server. So we are right now talking about this path in which we are migrating only the database. In going this route of migration, there are two major tasks. The first task is database migration, in which we migrate a Visual Fox Pro database to the SQL Server. And the second task is to migrate, not migrate, update the code so that it could use the SQL Server database. So in this second task, we will have the migrated code that is using the SQL Server database, not the VFP database. There are tools available to perform the first task, that is the VFP database migration. And Microsoft also provide the data morph tool, which is a very efficient tool written just for VFP database migration services. It can migrate the Visual Foxborough database to SQL Server, MySQL, um, Postgres, and MongoDB. And there are many other tools available in the market to perform this task, but there is no tool available for the other task, which is to migrate or update the code to use the database, the new database. When we talk about migration or upgradation of the code or modification of the code to use the new database, there are different approaches there that Visual Fox Pro provides us developers chooses. I just want to talk about the major approaches that we have in the Visual Fox Pro that can be used, and of course, using those approaches, we can define some different techniques based on the application, that how effectively we can use these techniques in our modified code. The first one is the remote views. Very simple thing. You can define a remote view to any external database and use it like a Foxpro a local view. Next one is the SQL pass-through, in which code modification is required, but it can use the new database servers capabilities for running the queries and performing the other operations. Then there's a cursor adapter, which is also used with consumes like it uses ODBC, and ADU also can be used there. Let's see in the detail. Remote views, you can define them, the remote views to any external database. Let's suppose you have the SQL Server EMP table. You can define a remote view here, and you can use that remote view as a DBF in your program, and you can simply perform your CRUD operations like add, edit, delete the records into that view, and it will work like that. There are some advantages. Very easy to use. Uh, but it requires some data access across the network. Data manipulation is easy, optimization is available up to certain extent, and based on the application and the database size, there are some concerns as well because it requires the network connection. So it depends on the network speed also. Um, Again, it limits the program to use the SQL Server's complete capabilities because it is defined in the Visual Fox Pro. And there are some other potential security risk as well if the views are not defined correctly. SQL pass-through is the other approach where we modify the code and use the um, tables in the SQL Server, and with that we can define the queries, and those queries can take the full advantage of the SQL Server capabilities, and it will be a direct connection to the SQL Server tables. This way we have more control over the queries. We can enhance the performance as well. uh, Data retrieval will be fast, and the database compatibility is somewhat an concern there because I mean it depends on the SQL Server or MySQL, whatever database you are using. So you need to write the code based on that. There are some concerns as well. By using the SQL pass-through, we will be losing the Visual Fox Pro some features that make the Visual Fox Pro code very efficient and fast when we are using the Visual Fox Pro own database, and that requires a lot of modifications with the code as well. It may increase the complexity because again the VFP code is written based on its own database, but we are now introducing more complex queries, and for the complex scenarios, uh, it will be more complex code then. Vendor lock-in, I mean, this should be written based on the SQL Server or MySQL, whatever the new database we are choosing. So if we want to move from SQL Server, that again requires the change in the code. Cursor adopters is again another popular approach that developers uses. It uses the memory very efficiently. You can define your cursor adapter object basically, and we can define is by defining the ODBC data source, or we can use the ADO object as well to define that. It provides some improved performance. Again, it's a simplified data sharing. It looks like you're working with the VFP data source, and with that we can also introduce the modular design to access the database. Um, some limitations, some concerns, which is the limited functionality. It again provides the limited functionality as compared to the Visual Fox Pro tables and the SQL pass-through. Um, it can be a little complex when you're defining the tables, and also depends on the database table itself, how big the table is, how what are the number of columns, and how the relationships are defined in the tables. uh, and there will be an overhead as well. So it affects on the performance also. As we discussed about three approaches, then the main question comes which approach to take, and the approach selection depends on few things. The VFP application varies from nature to nature, right? Some are very in which some very heavy databases are used. Relationships are more critical, number of records are more. So I mean we need to see all those things. Some in which the UI is very heavy, you need to load all those tables to give exactly the same experience to the user that they were using in the VFP for last 20, 30 years. So it mainly depends on the data sources. So what we do is we analyze the data sources that, okay, once we migrate the database, that how the data source will look like and how many databases will be required. Sometimes there are more than one databases are required. Network dependency is one of the major factor because now the database will be on another server and we are connecting through HTTP protocol and performing our operations there. Query complexities is also there. For every query that is written and which exists in the program and the legacy code, we need to compare it with how the performance will be. So these are some of the planning, consideration that we do. And very important one is the reports. The last one is how the reports are working. Usually the VFP applications have a lot more reports than normal programs. So we need to see that how the reports are used and how much operations are done in the reports after querying the data. So these are the approaches that we usually uh, take and plan for this thing. Now let's talk about testing. This is very important phase of the planning. When we uh, plan for the approach to take, we also consider how we'll perform the testing to the updated code. Requirement analysis is very important. We need to see the nature of the application, how heavy the application is, how heavy the database is, what is the performance requirement. We define the benchmark of performance for each screen or each program or each background process so that it will not surprise at the end. Uh, Data migration testing is very much required when we migrate the VFP data to SQL or any other database. It is required that the data is not lost during that migration and the right data types are chosen in the target database, and that will also be compatible with the queries in the program that we are writing. Integration testing, if the application is integrated to some other application or databases, that also required to be tested that they are working or not. And the last thing and the most important thing is security and compliance. And because of this reason, mainly we migrate the database from VFP to SQL. So that security and compliance testing should be planned thoroughly and done on very detailed level. So with this, I am concluding my details about the migrating from VFP database to the SQL.
Imran, that was great. Thank you for going through all those details. I especially like the database migration approaches. I'm sure it resonated with some folks. Um, and anybody listening in, we're going to be writing a white paper on this as well. So if you missed anything there, you'll see some of that list, back on the white paper. But thought that was great. And what we've seen also, when folks want to contact us, like Imran said, a lot of times we'll get folks that want to do both. Convert the code and do the database. But there are some times where they just want the back end. Typically, it's for security reasons, and then also with folks, the training part of it, right? Because they don't want to change the UI. So they want to make sure the folks know what they're doing from the front end perspective. So that's what we're saying. Okay. So again, that was a lot of details, and I appreciate Imran putting all that together. So this is just your opinion, though, Imran,
Yes.
and you've had some of the stuff already in those slides, but I want to replay the key risks that are associated with a DB only migration. Just maybe bring to the surface what you think are the key risks.
The top risk is the performance.
Okay.
VFP applications are very, very fast, right? So when we migrate the database to SQL Server or any other modern database, we need, of course, the user expect at least the same performance level or more better. So that requires very careful planning and testing that the performance will not be compromised after migration.
Okay.
That is one,
Excellent.
I think, and the foremost.
That's the biggest one, and we've heard that before. Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that back to the surface. Okay. So let's get some audience questions. Let's see what we got here. Okay. First one, when migrating the database, what are the typical timeframes?
Uh, it depends on the application, how big the application is. The bigger the application is, the more it takes the time because in this particular approach, we are updating, sorry, modifying the code. So we need to modify all the code in the VFP, which is dealing with the database access, querying database and manipulating the data and updating or deleting the data. So that code is required to be modified and of course tested. So it completely depend on how big the application is.
Even with data morph, right? There's still some research to be done there. But yeah,
Datamorph required Datamorph migrates the database to the
right.
SQL Server, but it does not update or modify the code itself, right? So
That
code
makes sense.
modification require time.
That makes sense. Okay, thank you for that. So next one's about cost. What are the estimated costs? So um, it really I hate to be so abstract here, but it really depends on how big the application or the database is. If folks want to really understand the cost, if you, I'll give my contact information after this, and you can contact me, and we'll get some details, and then we can give you some specifics on what it might cost. But it's really hard to answer with not actually seeing, the actual database. Okay. Other questions? Okay, third question. What migration strategy should be used? Do you favor a one-time migration or is a phase approach better?
So one-time migration, I believe the question is about migrate the whole application and roll in the production, right?
Right.
Or migrate fewer screens and roll them in the production. Uh, we prefer the first approach, migrate the whole application, then roll it in the production. But again, it depends on the size of the application. Some applications are so huge that they require many months to migrate or modify or make it able to use the new database code. And of course, we cannot roll half of the application which is using the VFP database and half of the application using the SQL Server database. So we always prefer to one-time migration and migrate the whole application, migrate the database, and put it in the production.
All right. Okay, one more question here. When is the best time to carry out the migration to reduce impact on business operations?
Uh, the answer is now. We should migrate now
Right.
because it is
Sooner
again
rather than later,
so
right?
risky. I mean, as the day by day it's going, it's getting more riskier. So, I mean, if you ask me, it's the now is the right time to migrate your application to minimize the impact on the business.
Yeah, good answer. Makes sense. Okay, let's see if there's anything else here. All right. It looks like that's a wrap on the chat question. So I want to thank Imran so much for all his expertise, right? Put together those slides, um, really brought everything to light there. So we appreciate it. And you talked a lot of tech there as well, which is great, which is the reason for this call. Folks that gave us the chat questions, thank you guys as well. It always makes these meetings a lot better. If anything wasn't answered or you want to contact me for maybe a quote or how long it will take, there you see my contact information. One more time, thanking Imran, thanking all our guests. And until next time, thanks everybody again for their time.
Thanks
Take care
very
now.
much.